All right, in this lecture, we're going to begin our exploration of Chapter 7, which is titled Computer and Network Security. And in particular, we're going to cover the introduction from the text and also section 7.1 and then section 7.2 about hacking. All right, so we're going to start with section 7.1, or the introduction. And of course, most of you probably all of you have a home network. And that means there is a modem that links your network to the internet and a wireless router that connects with your devices. And usually the two functions are combined into a single device. And most of you also probably have not changed the default administrator password on the router, or maybe most of you have, I don't really know. If you haven't, well, then your router may be compromised. More than 500,000 routers, in fact, are infected with malware capable of stealing passwords and intercepting financial information. And if you ever go to a coffee shop and use its open wireless network to surf the web, like at Starbucks, well, that's also very risky behavior, because freely available software gives any nearby computer user the ability to break into the accounts of people accessing websites through password-free wireless networks. So Chapter 7 focuses on threats to computer and network security. And millions of people in most businesses rely upon computers and the internet to conduct their affairs, which makes the security of these systems a very important and relevant issue. Without adequate security, computers are, obviously vulnerable to criminal enterprises that can introduce malicious software to reap valuable financial information from them or extort payments from victims. Computers can also be co-opted and used as weapons by governments seeking to further their political aims by sponsoring attacks on the cyber infrastructure of their enemies. And we're going to begin our survey with examples of individuals using skill or cunning to gain unauthorized access to computer systems. And these are the so-called hackers. But today, so section 7.2 is about hacking, but today people associate the word hacking with computers, but it didn't actually start out that way. In its original meaning, a hacker was an explorer or a risk taker, someone who was trying to make a system do something it had never done before. Hackers in this sense of the word abounded or flourished at MIT's Tech Model Railroad Club in the 1950s and 1960s. This club constructed and continuously improved an enormous HO scale model train layout. The members of the Signals and Power Subcommittee built an elaborate electronic switching system to control the movement of the trains. Wearing chino pants, short-sleeved shirts, and pocket protectors, the most dedicated members would drink vast quantities of Coca-Cola and stay up all night to improve the system. To them, a hack was a newly constructed piece of equipment that not only served a useful purpose, but also demonstrated its creator's technical virtuosity. Calling someone a hacker was a sign of respect. Hackers wore the label with pride. In 1959, after taking a newly created course in computer programming, some of the hackers shifted their attention from model trains to electronic computers. And the term hacker came to mean a person who delights in having an intimate understanding of the internal workings of a system, computers and networks in particular. In the 1983 movie War Games, a teenager breaks into a military computer and nearly causes a nuclear Armageddon. After seeing the movie, a lot of teenagers were excited at the thought that they could prowl cyberspace with a home computer and a modem. A few of them became highly proficient at breaking into government and corporate computer networks, and these actions helped change the everyday meaning of the word hacker. Today's hackers are people who gain unauthorized access to computers and computer networks. An example of the modern use of this word is a story in the February 5th, 2015 issue of the New York Times, which documents 9 incidents in which hackers breached databases of large businesses. Typically, you need a login name and a password to access a computer system, but good hackers are skilled at guessing short or predictable passwords. In 2013, Ars Technica asked 3 hackers to attack a list of 16,000 hashed passwords. Using computers, the hackers generated candidate passwords from strings of characters, hashed the candidates, and then checked the hashes against the list looking for matches. The least successful hacker spent 1 hour on the task and identified 62% of the passwords. The most successful hacker worked for 20 hours and identified 90% of the passwords using a commodity PC equipped with an AMD Radeon 7970 graphics card. Hackers employ brute force methods to guess shorter passwords. Passwords are constructed from a set of 95 characters, that is 26 uppercase letters, 26 lowercase letters, 10 digits, and 33 symbols. That means there are 95 passwords of length 1, 95 to the second power passwords of length 2, 95 to the third power of passwords of length 3, and so on. The total number of passwords up to length 6 is about 744 billion. And that, of course, that may seem like a lot of passwords to you, but a computer can try all of these combinations in just a few minutes. So hackers use dictionary attacks as well to guess, for longer passwords. Armed with lists of words that commonly appear in passwords, they generate candidate passwords using a variety of strategies, such as combining words, inserting random characters before or after the words, and replacing characters in words with random characters. Other techniques for obtaining login names and passwords are, decidedly low tech. Like eavesdropping, you simply look over the shoulder of a legitimate computer user to learn his or her login name and password. That's a common way that hackers can gain access to computers. Or dumpster diving means looking through garbage for interesting bits of information. And companies do not put a fence around their dumpsters. So in midnight rummaging sessions, hackers have found user manuals, phone numbers, login names, and passwords. Social engineering refers to the manipulation of a person inside the organization to gain access to confidential information. Social engineering is easier in large organizations where people do not know each other very well. So for example, a hacker may identify a system administrator and call that person, pretending to be the supervisor of his supervisor, and demand to know why he can't access a particular machine. So in this situation, a embarrassed person lower on the hierarchy, perhaps like a system administrator, is eager to please his boss's boss, so that person may be talked into revealing or resetting a password. So here's some password do's and don'ts. So do not use short passwords. Every password should be at least 11 characters. And do not rely solely on words from the dictionary. That's too easy to crack. So make sure your passwords include numbers as well as upper and lowercase letters. Do not rely on substituting numbers for letters. Password cracking programs know these tricks as well. And do not reuse passwords. If accounts share passwords, as soon as one account is compromised, the other ones will be too. And you should give ridiculous answers to security questions. That way, for example, what is your pet's name? You could say Ford Fiesta. And that way they can serve as sort of a secondary password. You should enable two-factor authentication if available. So when you log in from an unfamiliar computer, the system will send you a text message with a confirmation code, and have password recovery sent to a secure email address. You don't want hackers to know where your password reset messages are sent. You need to have these messages sent to an account you never use to send email. So under US law, the maximum penalties for hacking are severe. The Computer Fraud and Abuse Act criminalizes a wide variety of hacker-related activities, including transmitting code such as a virus or a worm that causes damage to a computer system, or accessing a system without authorization, even if no files are examined, changed, or copied. Transmitting classified government information is a crime. Trafficking in computer passwords is a crime. Computer fraud and computer extortion. The maximum penalty imposed for violating the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act is 20 years in prison and a $250,000 fine. Another federal statute related to computer hacking is the Electronic Communications Privacy Act. And this law makes it illegal to intercept telephone conversations, email, or any other data transmission. It also makes it a crime to access stored email messages without authorization. The use of the internet to commit fraud or transmit funds can be prosecuted under the Wire Fraud Act or the National Stolen Property Act. Adopting the identity of another person to carry out an illegal activity is a violation of the Identity Theft and Assumption Deterrence Act. On December 2nd of 2015, Saeed Rizwan Farook and Tashfeen Malik brought assault rifles and semi-automatic handguns into the Inland Regional Center in San Bernardino, California, and opened fire at a holiday gathering, killing 14 people and seriously wounding 22 more. Around the time of the shooting, Malik pledged allegiance to the Islamic State. Farook and Malik fled the event but died in a shootout with the police 4 hours later. Farook and Malik, who were married, had destroyed their personal cell phones before leaving home, but the FBI recovered Farook's work-issued iPhone 5C. The FBI was eager to collect evidence from Farook's iPhone. The FBI obtained a warrant to search the contents of the phone, and the owner of the phone, Farook's employer, consented to the search. However, the iPhone was locked, and the FBI did not know the 4-digit passcode. The iPhone software was designed so that if 10 consecutive incorrect passcodes were entered, the iPhone's encryption key would be erased, rendering all personal data stored on the iPhone permanently inaccessible. In February of 2016, the FBI asked Apple to create a new version of the iOS operating system that would disable the 10 erroneous passcode limit on the iPhone, as well as the feature that slows down subsequent passcode entry attempts when incorrect passcodes are entered. When Apple refused to cooperate, the FBI convinced a U.S. magistrate to issue an order for Apple to comply with the government's request. Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, responded to the court order by issuing a public statement that if Apple produced a backdoor version of the iOS that circumvented key security features and that version fell into the wrong hands, it would enable criminals to unlock any iPhone they possessed. The Department of Justice countered that the argument was fallacious because Apple could maintain custody of the software and destroy it after its purpose under the order has been served. Apple chose to fight the Department of Justice in court rather than comply with the FBI's request. About a month later, before the case could go to trial, the Department of Justice stopped its legal effort to get Apple to cooperate, declaring that it had successfully unlocked Farouk's iPhone. 2 years later, a report by the Inspector General of the Department of Justice revealed that the leader of the FBI's Cryptographic and Electronic Analysis Unit, which was in charge of the investigation, decided to take legal action against Apple before thoroughly exploring whether another unit inside the FBI, the Remote Operations Unit, had the capacity to unlock the phone without Apple's help. Senator Ron Wyden of Oregon accused the FBI of being more interested in establishing a legal precedent than gaining access to the terrorist's iPhone. So only a small fraction of the information transported by the internet is encrypted. Everything else is sent in the clear, which means using the Hypertext Transport Protocol, or HTTP. Encrypting everything would make internet communication slower and more expensive, which is why most websites use encryption only when communicating the most sensitive information, such as usernames, passwords, and credit card numbers. You can tell when a website is encrypting the communication because the start of the address in the web browser is HTTPS // meaning Secure Hypertext Transport Protocol. If the wireless access point is not using encryption, it's easy for devices within range to snoop on the network traffic. And sidejacking is the hijacking of an open web session by the capturing of a user's cookie, giving the attacker the same privileges as the user on that website. You can find an explanation of cookies back in Chapter 5, Section 5.3.15. And e-commerce websites typically use encryption to protect the username and password people provide when logging in, but they do not encrypt the cookie that the web browser sends to the user to continue the session. So sidejacking is possible on unencrypted wireless networks because another device on the wireless network can hear the cookie being transmitted from the website back to the user's computer. So even though the internet security community had known and complained about the sidejacking vulnerability for years, e-commerce websites did not change their practices. Let's look at a case study which we can title Fire Sheep. So on October 21st, 2010, Eric Butler released an extension to the Firefox browser called Fire Sheep. Fire Sheep makes it easy for a Firefox user to sidejack open web sessions. The user starts the Firefox browser, connects to an open Wi-Fi network, and clicks on a button called Start Capturing. When someone using the network visits an insecure website that Fire Sheep knows about, the user's name and photo are displayed in a sidebar, along with the name of the website he is connected to, such as Amazon, Facebook, or Twitter. And by double-clicking on the photo, the attacker becomes logged in as that user on that website and is able to do the same things that the legitimate user is able to do, such as post status messages and purchase products. Butler released Fire Sheep as free open source software for Mac OS X and Windows. In Butler's view, the organizations managing websites have a responsibility to protect the privacy of the people using those sites. And since the organizations had been ignoring this responsibility, he thought it was time for users to step up and demand greater security. And Fire Sheep was, he thought, a way to help make that happen. The Fire Sheep extension was downloaded more than 500,000 times in its first week of availability, and it attracted a great deal of media attention. The typical story warned social network users about the dangers of using unencrypted wireless public networks and criticized the social network companies for not providing more security. Responding to criticism for providing a tool that makes it easy for ordinary computers or computer users to perform sidejacking. Butler pointed out that sidejacking tools had been available for years before he released Firesheep. He wrote, "Criminals already know this, and I reject the notion that something like Firesheep turns otherwise innocent people evil." 3 months after Butler released Firesheep, Facebook made the following announcement. "Starting today, we'll provide you with the ability to experience Facebook entirely over HTTPS. You should consider enabling this option if you frequently use Facebook from public internet access points found at coffee shops, airports, libraries, or schools. The option will exist as part of our advanced security features, which you can find in the account security section of the account settings page." And then in March 2011, Twitter announced that it was offering an always use HTTPS option as well. All right, so let's look at Firesheep from some of the more promising normative systems of ethics that we have already established as being promising. So what would an ACT utilitarian analysis yield here? So the release of Firesheep led the media to focus on the risks associated with the use of certain websites from unsecured wireless networks, and a few months later, Facebook and Twitter made their websites more secure. So that was the consequence of it. There continues to be strong pressure as well for other web services to follow suit. These are no doubt tremendous benefits for everyone who accesses the web at a public internet access point without encryption. And so it seems like Butler's right when he predicted that Firesheep would not turn people into criminals if they weren't already. And so even though 500,000 people downloaded Firesheep in the first week, there was no evidence of a big increase in identity theft or even malicious pranks. And the harms caused by Firesheep appear to be minimal. So because the release of Firesheep caused great benefits and negligible harm, we can conclude from an ACT utilitarian analysis that it was good or morally right. All right, what about from a virtue ethics perspective? Well, Butler demonstrated civic responsibility, you could argue, by using his technical skills to develop Firesheep, which was a piece of software that dramatically illustrated, even to non-technical people, the lack of security when unencrypted HTTP messages are sent over an unencrypted Wi-Fi network. And on the day he released Firesheep, Butler pointed out on his blog that sidejacking attacks are simple to execute because cookies are wirelessly broadcast without encryption. And websites haven't eliminated this problem, even though it has been discussed for a long time. He continued, Facebook is constantly rolling out new privacy features in an endless attempt to quell the screams of unhappy users, but what's the point when someone can just take over an account entirely? And Butler explained that he released Firesheep to point out the gravity or seriousness of the problem. So, responding to criticisms of his action, he stated emphatically that it is wrong for anyone to harm another person. So he did not create Firesheep to facilitate evil. Instead, his goal was to make people aware of a problem that had been ignored for too long. So all of these statements appear to be characteristic of someone who's truly interested in protecting the privacy of visitors to popular websites. You could argue that Butler exhibited the virtue of courage by taking personal responsibility for creating Firesheep, and he demonstrated benevolence, the virtue of benevolence, by making it freely available. So therefore, from the perspective of virtue ethics, all else being equal, Butler's actions and statements were characteristic of someone interested in promoting the common good, and he seemed to sincerely believe that something significant needed to be done to get the companies to change their privacy policies. But I wonder if other vices were exhibited as well. So I'll leave that for you to think about. Okay, and finally, we can conclude with a Kantian analysis. Well, to begin with, accessing someone else's user account is an invasion of that person's privacy. It is wrong. So Butler clearly agrees with this perspective because he refers to people who sidejack accounts as evil. But Butler's goal was to pressure Facebook, Twitter, Amazon, and other websites to adopt proper security measures to protect their users. He thought the best way to achieve this end was to release a tool that would bring to light a well-known security problem that had not gotten sufficient attention. After all, criminals already knew how to sidejack web sessions before Butler created Firesheep. And so all Firesheep did was make sidejacking so simple that even ordinary computer users could do it. So as we know, more than 500,000 copies of Firesheep were downloaded in the first week, and undoubtedly some of these people actually use the software to sidejack web sessions, which is wrong. And so it's disingenuous for Butler to reject the notion that something like Firesheep turns otherwise innocent people evil. It gives them a temptation or a skill set that they wouldn't have had to execute an action that sure, maybe it's rooted in their nature, but without the ability, and sometimes with the temptation, you can push someone in the wrong direction and enable them. So he provided a tool that made it much simpler for people to do something that is wrong, and therefore he has some moral accountability for the misdeeds of the people who downloaded Firesheep. So, in that sense, I think he was encouraging vice. But ultimately, Butler was willing to tolerate a short-term increase in privacy violations in the hope that users would pressure Facebook, Twitter, and other sites to improve their security, which would result in fewer privacy violations in the long term. So what that means is Butler was willing to use the victims of Firesheep as a means to his end. So from a Kantian perspective, it was wrong for Butler to release Firesheep to the public. And there are other ways Butler could have achieved his goal without using other people. For example, he could have gone on a popular television show and hacked into the host's Facebook page, generating a great amount of publicity without having to release the software.